Hi, everyone. Hi, Colm.
Hi, Bernard. Is this okay?
I think Ben's going to fix you.
All right, great.
Thank you for being with us this morning. I'm Bernard Schwartz. This is obviously Colm Tóibín. Is it early for you, Colm? It's about 9:40.
Yeah. Normally going to bed at this time, yeah.
What time zone are you in, you peripatetic soul?
What?
Are you in LA time zone now or a Dublin time zone?
No, I live in my head. I'm in a sort of permanent dream, really.
Well, welcome. I think it's worth noting, at least for me, that the last time we did something on stage together, it was in London, and it was around the poems of Elizabeth Bishop, in particular the recordings at the 92nd Street Y had of Bishop's reading from her work. I mentioned it because we're back in Bishop land, and in fact this morning I was up very early and saw the roosters, and there's that great line from her poem, get up, stop dreaming.
Get up, stop dreaming.
Yeah. This is where I live, is what she says in that poem. We've titled this session as Writerly Attention, and we're going to get right into it because there isn't a lot of time, and you have to pay attention all day. And the way we've set it up is we've picked extracts, or Colm has picked extracts from works, novels, some journalism that reads like novels and poems. And we're just gonna, Colm's gonna read a bit from each of them and talk about them, and I'll interject moderately, as moderators ought to do. In thinking about the theme of attention, Colm, I came upon an interview, actually a couple of interviews. What you do when you prepare for these things is you try and watch Colm on YouTube, which is a lot of fun. You should do it. But recently, he's been telling interviewers, he's prolific, so he's always being interviewed and asked questions. You've been working on a long piece on the Beatles, right?
Yeah.
And one thing of note was, I remember you saying that George Harrison was the fourth child, and that you were the fourth child, and there was something interesting about that, which we're not going to get into now. But the other thing is that you came upon the quote from Lennon, John Lennon, not the Lennon we're about to hear from in Anna Karenina, where he said that he was both a monk and a performing flea. And you described writing that down and saying that perfectly describes you. Anyway,
Yeah.
in terms of attention.
Yeah, I was reading stuff that John Lennon had written, and one thing he said was, I am a monk and I am a performing flea. And I looked at that and thought, yeah. And I don't have a notebook like that, but I wrote that down immediately in case I'd lose it or something, because I thought it was a pretty good definition, a monk and a performing flea. I mean, it's that idea of the public and the private, the writer at home working and the writer on a stage. Here's the performing flea, hello.
Welcome. Should we get right to it? Do you want to set the stage a little bit on what we're going to do?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to sort of outline a dilemma that Tolstoy had when he was writing Anna Karenina, which is that there's a figure called Levin. He's out in the countryside, he's totally idealistic, he's totally lonely. You realize he's deeply in love with a woman called Kitty in the city, and he's never going to get her. Kitty is never going to want to come out there and live with him, but this is his longing, and every time he goes to Petersburg, every time he goes to Moscow, it's looking for Kitty. So you have this impossible love, this dream of Levin's. You're on Levin's side, and you realize surely they'll be happy if they marry. And of course, as the 19th century goes on, novelists become more and more interested in the idea that, yes, you bring the characters towards marriage, but once you marry them, you have 300 pages left. What are you going to do now? In other words, in Pride and Prejudice, you can have Darcy with his 10,000 a year, and the end of the novel is he gets married, and it's all going to be. When she says even that he becomes less grumpy in marriage, Darcy, but they don't go into detail. But of course, a novelist sometime later thinks about this and looks at it and says, what if Darcy turned out to be a bully and a crank? What if the £10,000 wasn't really there? What if? In other words, the marriage plot turns and becomes the idea that after marriage, Levin, the first thing Levin realizes is Kitty, who he thought was a free spirit, is totally interested in domestic life and how the kitchen works and the servants and making everything work. And that's what she wants to talk about over dinner, whereas he wants to talk about the spirit or reforms in agriculture or the future or the soul. Kitty wants to talk about, jam, the making of jam and the servants. And Levin just doesn't understand how he didn't know this before he married her. And it's such an awful business. But then the next thing is where Kitty has a baby. And it's done with immense drama. Her pregnancy is dealt with extraordinary amount of care and detail. And then she has the baby. And, it's a long, long baby coming in a novel. And the problem is then, what do you do then? Because happiness is not a good thing in a novel. People reach towards happiness, or they lose happiness, they remember happiness, they dream of happiness, but they don't have happiness. It doesn't work in a novel. You have to dramatize the loss of things. And Levin has a baby, and thinks this is what Levin surely wants more than anything in the world. And you should think Levin picks up the baby. Levin stared at the baby. Generations of earlier Levins appeared in the baby's eyes, and this was great satisfaction for Levin. He looked forward to walking in the forest with this object. But he doesn't. He's completely disconcerted at the arrival of this screaming little thing. He doesn't know what to do about it at all. He stares at it. He leaves the room. He goes for a long walk, sees anything but the baby. And the problem Tolstoy now has is what to do next. And what you're looking for now is that there's no point in saying one morning he woke up and went to look at this little object and felt intense love. That won't work. Readers say, yeah, he felt that maybe, but give it to me. Give me what it was that he saw. And Tolstoy comes up with a genius solution. This is just a very short. So this is the baby. The baby had taken the breast. Come, that's enough. But Kitty would not let the baby go. He fell asleep in her arms. Look now, said Kitty, turning the baby so that he could see it. The aged-looking little face suddenly puckered up still more, and the baby sneezed. Now, this is the thing. It could be the baby just fell asleep, or the baby looked wonderful. No, that the baby sneezed. And smiling, hardly able to restrain his tears, Levin kissed his wife and went out of the dark room. What he felt towards this little creature was utterly unlike what he had expected. There was nothing cheerful and joyous in the feeling. On the contrary, it was a new torture of apprehension. You see, it could be easy to say he sneezed and Levin recognized his full humanity and saw it wasn't just a baby, it was a person. No, that's not good enough. That's too easy a completion. He feels worse, actually. What he felt towards this little creature was utterly unlike what he had expected. There was nothing cheerful and joyous in the feeling. On the contrary, it was a new torture of apprehension. It was the consciousness of a new sphere of liability to pain. In other words, that he was going to have to worry now about this baby. And the sense was so painful at first, the apprehension lest this helpless creature should suffer was so intense that it prevented him from noticing the strange thrill of senseless joy and even pride he had felt when the baby sneezed. In other words, when the baby sneezed, he got not one feeling, but two. One, that he was going to worry all his life about this creature, and the other, senseless joy and even pride. But so I'm thinking about that idea as you're working on a novel or as you're reading a novel. The two things, I think, go together here, where you're watching this detail, you're savoring, what's he going to do now in order to give me a detail that will be, I suppose, vivid enough and lifelike enough and sharp enough that it would actually allow you to see the moment. And then make the narrative more complex by, it isn't a simple business, that he loved the baby from that moment as a sneeze. But no, he feared for it, and he also felt a thrill of senseless joy and even pride. So as you're working on a novel, you're constantly looking for the sneeze. Give me, oh Lord, the sneeze.
So give us the sneeze. What... You're surely working on something that we'll see soon. Have you found the sneeze in whatever it is you're working on now?
Well, the book that we were talking about earlier, which is just out, it's called A Long Winter. It's a reissue of an old story that I think no one read it when it came out the first time. So we thought we'd have a second go at it. And the problem is that the boy's mother has disappeared in the snow. and it's the High Pyrenees and it's the winter. And it's clear that her body will not be found until there's a thaw, until the spring comes. So I'm working away on this. He goes out every day in case he can find her. The son does. He's about 20 years old. His father is just not bothering, and he goes out every day in the snow to see if he can find her. The problem I have now is I need to sneeze. I need something. And like, when is he going to find her? How is he going to find her? It can't just be the spring came one Monday, and by Wednesday the snow had all dissolved and gone. So when he went out, he was easily able to find her. There she was, and he buried her. In a religious ceremony, it was all over. Like, just no. I need a sneeze. And so I asked somebody, do vultures hibernate? Do vultures go south in the winter? Because I don't know anything about birds. And they said, yeah, vultures' beaks can't go through frozen food. So they have to wait. They go to Africa, and then as the spring comes, they come up to the Pyrenees again. They can be seen. But they can only be seen if there's a body or if there's flesh for them. And so then I had to work out, what do vultures actually do when they do what they do? And I was at an event like this, and who did I see coming out the door but Margaret Atwood and her bird-watching husband, Graham. And I had them. For a second, I had them. I mean, we could have talked about our contracts, our, performing flea business, and I said, no, look, could you just tell me, what do vultures actually do? I mean, do they take the flesh up in the air? Like, how do they get in there? How many vultures does it take to change a light bulb? And Graham just said to me very calmly, here's the name of a book. It gives the best description I've ever read of what vultures do. And I didn't steal what this book said, but I went pretty close. In other words, this guy describes, I maybe shouldn't go into detail, but that in order to get the flesh up, the vulture has to put one leg right down into the body and use it as leverage to pull up sinew and stuff. I thought that was great. And I realized that I had a whole new layer for the novel, that it wasn't about searching for his mother in the snow, but looking at the sky when March came, because if there were vultures in the sky, it meant there was a body below. And what he was looking for was up rather than down. And that gave me a way of making the thing, of just finding a layer that wasn't just the layer of narrative, the layer of, yes, he looked for his mother, yes, he found her when spring came. No, something else has to happen that means that he's not, that, in other words, one more thing. And but I didn't know anything about it when I started, at Vulture. I didn't know anything about vultures. And by the end, I found out only what I needed. I was careful not to find out anything more in case I might put it into the book and bore everybody.
But the sneeze is precipitated by some kind of irritation. So you were in the Pyrenees, you looked up, you saw a vulture. Where did the word vulture, the image of vulture, the idea of vulture come from? And then you realized you needed to know something about what they did to flesh.
Yeah, it comes mysteriously. In other words, that sneeze, what couldn't have been a first draft. In other words, you can see him thinking, I need one more thing, I need something here. And that's in a way the excitement of the thing, where you're working and you don't know what's coming and you think, I need it, I don't know what it is, but at some moment it will come as a kind of gift and you have to seize on it. You also, of course, can get a terrible idea late at night and you can write it all down, and the morning is a very cold, unforgiving thing. And so you just cut it out in the morning. That was a rubbish idea, and it must go. It isn't as though everything that would come would work, but that I think with everything, you're always looking for the actual seeable thing, for the visible, the thing. You close your eyes and think, is there a thing I can use here? Rather than a thought, rather than an emotion, rather than saying senseless joy and even pride. If you're putting senseless joy and even pride into a novel, you've got to be very careful to have a sneeze coming soon, because those abstract terms, those big emotional terms, just won't hold.
Just to stick with The Long Winter for another minute, I think composition of that story is unique. Do you want to talk about where you were when you wrote it?
What happened was that someone told me a story that this woman in the High Pyrenees, who was married to her husband and had 2 kids, had walked out one day in some argument, And it was one of those very dangerous days in the High Pyrenees where the sky's blue, but it's winter, meaning that the snow can come really fast, the first snow of the year, and it can be 6 to 8 feet snow. And if anyone is out in that snow, it's very, very dangerous. And this woman had been buried in the snow, and they had gone looking for her, and they hadn't found her until the spring. So I had this story. I realized I won't get this again, an arc like that. The mother walking out, the sort of marriage, her, them all looking for her, and what's happening to her son's consciousness as this is happening. So I went up to that very place at that very time of the year, and I stayed there writing the story. And every day I would use a detail. For example, one night the big barn door began to bang in the wind, and I got up and had to close it. But on the way back to bed, I had a lovely thought. I'm putting that very moment into the story tomorrow morning as soon as I get up. In other words, that everything I was seeing, there's a thing up there called La Borufa, which is it looks like snow, but it isn't. It's surface snow being blown by a strong wind, and it looks like swirling snow. I'm putting that into the story tomorrow morning. I saw hunters hunting wild boar, and the whole idea of the wild boar being killed and shot in the mountains. I put that in the following morning. So I had a great time because I thought, well, at least this is authentic. You always worry writing fiction that, you're not getting things right in some way. I mean, a novel is 1,000 details, and you keep worrying that some of them are wrong, Like if you had a vulture in the winter up there, someone would say to you, vultures don't come up here in the winter. I said, oh my God, they do in my story.
Can we talk for a minute about the fact that you wrote it, nobody read it, as you say, and then we've seen it now reissued. It's 20 some odd years later. Did you revisit it? You're known, I learned this from my not YouTubing, that you're known for writing a first chapter and letting it sit for a year, sometimes longer. I'm interested in your process of composition, especially the idea of allowing things to sort of sit and return to them. And also, it seems to me, because you're so prolific, you're always working on so many different things at the same time. But did you go back to the story? Did you take things out? Did you put things in?
I did an audio of it. And there's nothing more. You learn a lot from having to read out loud into a microphone for a tape recorder your own stuff, And I didn't make any changes in it, but I was a bit freaked by reading it because I got the emotion back, in a way that I wouldn't want to do again or anything. But no, I didn't make any changes to it. I mean, one of the problems in our cultures, in our literary cultures now, is that a book of short stories is considered a collection of your scraps. And nobody wants to read them. And people might buy a book of stories, but they take it home tentatively, put it there, read one of the stories. But unfortunately, The Long Winter was the last story in the book. And as a result, no one read it. And it's a lovely idea, the book it's lying there all the years and people have it. I have it, meaning I have it at home, but I haven't read it. And the only exception to that is China, where the Chinese haven't realized yet that a book of short stories is not a trendy, good thing. It's a bad thing. A novel is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of short stories, you have a new book of short stories coming out this spring, the news from Dublin. They are not scraps, they're wonderful.
Oh, not scraps. Yeah. Wonderful, thank you.
Put that on the...
I should put that in the front.
Yeah.
Good title, not scraps.
But, I was looking through it, and a lot of those are formally published, and then there's one that we were talking about, Free Man, that sort of isn't, and that you'd gotten the idea for that story 15 years ago. You just kind of stuck with it. I guess I'm interested in pursuing this a little bit further, which is what compels you to return to that particular story?
Yeah. I work in longhand, and I use notebooks, and I started dating them. I wasn't doing that before, but just to see when something started. And the beginning of that story of Free Man, which was finished earlier this year, was Charles de Gaulle Airport, 2011. Now, why I was doing this in Charles de Gaulle Airport, I must have had a notebook with me. I must have had an idea for the opening, but the opening wouldn't come right. And I would write the opening paragraph over and over and over, and a year later go back to it, and I'd bring the notebook everywhere with me. I never lost it, And I was trying to work out, it's a man in a city who's trying to get one of those cards that allows you to use the city bikes, so you can zoom around on those bikes. It's in Barcelona. And I have him going and peering at how to get such a bike, how to get the card you use to release the bike. So again, we're back to the sneeze, where I suddenly realized that actually, if I could get something, I get an image, just give me an image. Stop giving me, he went to look where the bikes were and looked at the directions and thought he might do this tomorrow. What I did was, in the end, it's a man in the corner of a room trying to tilting his credit card. He wants to get a bike, so he has to send them some money. Tilting it, this is the old credit card so that the numbers are embossed, so he can see the numbers on the credit card, so he can transcribe them and put them into the thing. But in other words, it was a thing, a credit card. It was tilting it in the light so that you're in a room. This is actually what you would do. But it took me years to get it. I mean, I was doing everything else except that. And one day I got it, and then I was away. You know, once I had that, the sneeze, the credit card, the emboss, the tilt, then I could do the story. But that was, that was 15 years later.
Yeah. Have you ever ridden a city bike, Colm?
No, but I did try, like that man, to get one, but the whole complexity of the technology.
But just for the sake of the story, not to go for a bike ride.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to ride a horse to write a horse riding story.
Do you want to move to the next extract?
Years ago, the New Yorker, I think the New Yorker Festival, asked me that I could interview anyone I wanted that they could, who they could find and who would agree to come, anyone. And I think they meant a writer or a painter or someone but the person I most wanted to interview was Robert Caro. And Robert Caro is the biographer of Lyndon Johnson, and he's the biographer of Robert Moses. But he's embarked on a project using such an amount of detail, of the sort of detail a novelist is always looking for. That's what he's looking for. I realized that, of course, he's really read huge numbers of novels, and he's almost basing what he's doing on the system of like building characters slowly using detail. He told me in the interview that he had interviewed every single person who was on that plane that took Kennedy's body back from Dallas to Washington. And he was using the photographs of who was on the plane, and he had it, and he was writing it. And then one night he woke in the night. It's a good thing I did not. He woke in the night, and he nudged his wife, Anna, who was working very closely with him. He said, "Anna, I have forgotten to interview the photographer." So he went into the public library. He went through all the phone books. He had the name of the photographer, and he called this number, and a woman answered, and he said who he was, and she said, "He's been waiting for you." Because he told, the one detail he told Caro was that Lyndon Johnson said to the photographer, "In any photograph of me on this plane now, as we're going, Mrs. Kennedy must be in the frame, must be in the photograph. Otherwise, people will think it could be a coup, it could be something I've done against the Kennedys, but she must be with me in every photograph." And this gave you a sense of Johnson planning every single moment. What's it going to look like when we arrive in Washington? And he has an extraordinary passage. I mean, it's not exactly like the passage in Henry James's Portrait of a Lady, where Isabel Archer sits through the night going through the terms of her dilemma. There's no dialogue in that James passage. There's just a lot of the mind moving and moving slowly. But this is Johnson after the assassination in Dallas. In a rush, not running because that would call attention to them, but walking as fast as they could, they left the cubicle through hospital corridors, following a red stripe on the floor to the emergency room exit where the cars were waiting. Youngblood first, his head turning ceaselessly from side to side as he searched for danger. Now, going with Caro, this is Youngblood, who was a Secret Service, his head turning ceaselessly from side to side as he searched for danger. Caro would be able to give you a source for that. He interviewed someone. What was Youngblood doing? And the purpose, and that he was moving ahead like that. It's not something he imagines or something he presumed happens. It's something he has a source for. Johnson second, his eyes down as if he didn't want to catch the eye of anyone who might be watching. then the 2 congressmen, and then 2 more Secret Service agents and Lady Bird, who kept breaking into a trot as she tried to keep up. Now, that's just a small example. What this goes on to do is Johnson is standing against the wall thinking, I am now President of the United States. What do I have to do? What are the things I'm going to try and achieve? And he has all this, of course, from people that Johnson spoke to later. But he has also people who watched Johnson that day, who were in the room, who saw him for that half hour in absolute silence, thinking, standing there. And Caro puts that in, it was extraordinarily vivid. And then, of course, like any novelist, he needs to break up this, I suppose, interior sense of this interior life. And he has, of course, Bobby Kennedy as his sort of avatar, as a fellow who, when Kennedy comes on the plane when they land in Washington, he seeks to find his sister-in-law first. And in doing that, he brushes by the President of the United States without speaking to him. And Caro realizes this is something almost from Greek theater to Shakespeare. It is the new leader. It is the small moment of discourtesy that is going to imply that it's going to cause such grief over the next few years. But that detail, he brushed by him without saluting him or speaking to him to get to his sister-in-law. But the Caro project is so filled with lessons for novelists over when to stop the interior business, when to go into action, how much psychology to leave out, just have that brush by without telling you what anyone was thinking at that moment. And so this is the second one I have here, because I think it's something we can learn from reportage, and that the connection sometimes between me up in the Pyrenees trying to work out what the weather, describing the weather, the snow, the cold, the banging of doors, isn't very far away from that other business of him trying to work out from his sources, from all the information he has, what Johnson was doing. Lady Bird in a trot. Someone said that to him.
Yeah.
You know, he got that from somewhere.
Yeah. Here's a bit more of what you mean. This is Caro. There had been something striking in his bearing, he means Johnson, something that had first shown itself that day in the tone of his voice as he lay on the floor of a speeding car with a heavy body on top of him, and the frantic voices on the shortwave radio crackling in his ears. For all his rages and bellowing, his gloating and groaning, his endless monologues, his demeanor was very different in moments of crisis. There was a stillness about him, an immobility. The hangdog look was gone, the lines on his face no longer drooping. The men who knew him the longest knew that expression. So all of that, Caro is able to do not because he was there, but because he's spoken with everybody who was there and who knew Johnson before and after. Did I read somewhere that, I don't know if the moment of discourtesy, the supercharged moment of discourtesy that you've referenced, did I read that Johnson, when he needed the oath of office, he could have called anyone, but he called Bobby Kennedy to get the exact language? Is that in Caro's book?
Yeah, that's in Caro's book. And he also, he wanted to keep the administration as it was. So his words to everybody was, I need you more than he ever did. But even he said that eventually to Bobby Kennedy, who didn't appreciate it. Yeah. You know, and he also, that was a Friday, he was found wandering around the Oval Office on the Saturday by Bobby Kennedy. And that didn't help either.
Yeah.
Like he moved in too fast.
Right. You were a journalist. Talk about what it was to be a journalist before you became a novelist. I still think of you as a journalist.
Yeah. I think like a journalist.
What does that mean?
A journalist, a performing flea and monk. What happened in Ireland in the 1980s was that the newspapers couldn't get colour advertising. They just didn't have the technology. And therefore, a few magazines could keep going using colour advertising. And I worked for 2 of them. I edited one, and I was the features editor of another. And we really felt, it wasn't about money. No one really wanted a secure job. But the question was that there were 2 things really on my mind, in my sights. One was the Catholic Church, and the other was the IRA. And so you could just, basically, you could spend your time mocking bishops, attacking bishops, just having bishops in your sight. just to undermine the power of bishops by saying, look what we can do, we can insult you. And the same was true for sort of high Irish nationalism. That was just cruelty and was just going nowhere, and car bombs blowing limbs off people. And the impulse for this came from America. In other words, we were reading Joan Didion, we were reading John Gregory Dunn, we were reading Norman Mailer, we were reading, what's he called, the guy who wrote, remember, The Vanities, and soaking up the idea that the opening of your article had to read like the opening of a novel, that you had to set a tone, and that you could do that you could do a 5,000-word piece. I never wrote news. I never wrote, the sources in the government claim that there has been, that I never wrote that. So it was a great training in structure and meeting deadlines, and also realizing that there are readers, and that this is to be written for a reader. And the reader is very close to you, because the magazine would come out a week later, and the people around you would read the article. So it was a very good time, and it was a very good training without me realizing that I was training for anything. I was just working, just week after week, just trying to get good stories. And then I realized that you can do this for a certain number of years, your energy goes, and I began to write a novel. And that was great. People mocked you. There was so much mockery about writing a novel. Journalists writing a novel. You're writing your novel. Dublin is a particularly bitter place about people writing novels, because there was really just one great novelist and the rest of us are nobody. There was Joyce, and he went, he was heroic. And then anybody else is just, you're writing your little novel, are you?
But you did it. And you kept doing it.
Yeah, I did. I wrote my little novel. Yeah.
But I mean, this brings up, I think, an interesting, let's call it, later in your career development, which is that you recently published a book of poems. Do you want to talk about your career as a poet?
I do. That's what I'm here for. My life. Billy Collins has look, when I was 12, I started writing poetry. And I was meant to be doing physics and biology and serious things, and I would write poems. And I was a sad, lonely boy in County Wexford in Ireland. And every evening I would write a poem. And I found there was a magazine with printing teenage poems. The problem with that is that everything I sent them is now in an archive. It was the Capuchin order, and they kept everything. They called me a few years ago and said, you do know that everything is on open access in our archive. I said, can I buy it from you? Can I get it? Can I burn it? Can I? And then no. And so by the time I went to university, it was increasingly clear in university that the poems were no good. Now, this is a serious matter in Ireland, because we have Seamus Heaney, we have Van Boland, list the poems. I mean, forget the dead ones. These were alive. These were around you. And these were doing readings all the time in the city, and there were younger ones coming up, and my poems were no good. How I knew they were no good was that they were sent back to me all the time by everybody. And again, mockery begins. So you're writing more of those poems, and like any more poems rejected recently? These are meant to be friends of yours. And so I stopped. And so I was a sad, failed poet. Dublin is filled with them. Sad, failed poets. And, the idea that you go on to write a novel after that is another example of your failure to produce proper poems. He went and wrote novels. And, if you saw a young poet in the city of Dublin even now, there would be a certain reverence around that young poet, not to speak of the middle-aged ones. And so luckily, the world was a poem-free zone, that didn't have to read any of my poems, because I didn't write any. 30 years was a poem-free me. And I started again writing these little poems, and I started, I would do it on a laptop, which meant that every draft was the only draft available. I didn't keep anything. I would erase, and let it go. And so every time every time you made a change, that was the new poem. I found this sort of exciting. They were still no good, by the way. And then I started to work more, and I started to try and find a more relaxed way into the poem, rather than sort of any density in the texture, or trying to get words to do sort of rhythmic things. Even just say the thing. Use your breath and use your voice and use a sort of natural tone and see where that might take you. So yeah, and then I found an editor who said, I'll publish these. You have no idea the joy. I mean, these novels are nothing. The joy of a book of poems came. And, they needed a cover. So I realized the book was called Vinegar Hill. And my mother had painted for a few years. She'd gone to just study painting as an amateur thing, and she had a painting of Vinegar Hill. So I got to put her painting on the cover of my book, so that there was something elemental about this. I mean, speaking of sneezing, that I put my mother's painting on the cover of my book.
This is the time where we could talk about Colm and psychoanalysis, but we won't. With your dear departed friend, Ivor Brand. Yeah. But something that I wanted to discuss is often when speaking about your writing, whether it's the novels or the stories or now the poems, you speak of the process of composition in reference to both painting and music making. You don't. Your mom painted. You don't paint, and you don't sing. You sing a little.
I sing really badly at parties.
But you've written a lot about visual art and some about musicians, and I'm interested in just if you'd reflect on. It always just seems to come up that way, that you think about your writing and the process of composition in terms of painting and in music making, even when you discussed finding your way back to the short story after writing The Master, this idea of breath control, or, with the poems, following the image, or even sometimes you mix the metaphor, allowing the song to determine the shape of a story. What draws you to painting and music making when talking about writing?
I suppose in Ireland, there are a good number of good singers. I mean traditional singers. I mean people who would have learned the song from someone in the family, would have gone back generations, and somebody would have the gift. It could just be one person in a family who had the voice and the determination and the seriousness to go ahead with this. And watching them perform and getting to hang out with them and know them, the first issue is the song is more important than the singer. That if you were, as an Irish traditional singer, if you were displaying your talent, or if you were doing too many grace notes, or if you were just doing a performing flea thing, people would despise you because the song. No, it's a song. Go for the song. And it's that idea in a story or a novel or even a poem, but just say in a novel, it's the novel that matters. You are invisible. You are self-suppressed. You are, my thing is that the page is not a mirror. There's no you, there's no Eunice, there's no person on the other side. The page is blank and you must fill it. And therefore, the idea that, yes, the shape of your experience and the shape of whatever you are will come in the novel in some way or other, in ways that maybe are even hidden from you at times. That there are areas of that you both reveal and conceal, but in ways that you don't think about when you're working. You're thinking about the next image. You're looking for the next thing. Each sentence is almost a reply to the previous one. If you're using a certain rhythm, you have to vary the rhythm. If you are beginning too many sentences with, he went, he did, he saw, she went, she did, she saw, change it to, just change. You're constantly, so the master of this, the person who can teach us most is Cézanne. Is Cézanne's brushstrokes, each one a variation of the previous one, each one the thing dipped in in a mustard color, or he's put a bit of green into this, and he's put that down, and so that the accumulation of these brushstrokes will actually emerge as a thing much larger than each brushstroke would suggest, that you get a vista, or you get a tree, or you get a mountain, or you get light. You get light, and you get shifting light. And so there is a connection between that way of working with brushstrokes and that way of working with sentences. And with the music thing, obviously it is that you don't go if you have a beautiful song, you realize don't mess with the beauty by overstating it. Don't push your luck with this. Start slow. Start as though it's nothing much. It's a story being told in a song. And this will leave you so much space as you go towards the end to sort of lift it, imperceptibly lift the song and see what you can do with that. And I think that you get, I think you even get this in the, say, in the more popular tradition in Ireland with someone like Van Morrison or even Bono, that just the way of approaching a song and that the song.
Yeah. But you're...
Does that answer your question?
Sure. You're not only singing the song, you're creating the song. I mean, one of the things that I like about, you're being a wonderful and now fairly famous novelist is that they ask you to write these afterwords. So if you pick up The South in paperback, you're both Colm, the writer of The South, and Colm, the reader who's reflecting on the South. And I don't know when you wrote the afterword of The South, but you talk about the struggle of writing your first book. I guess one question I have, anyway, you say something very memorably in the afterword, which is that you talking to the painter Barry Cook. Oh, yeah. He just said, make a mark.
Yeah.
And you went home. Yeah. And you made a mark.
I was trying to get this painter, this Irish painter Barry Cook, to explain to me how a painting gets made. So I started with a really clunky, Barry, how do you start? I mean, you have, just say, a prime canvas, and you have your studio, meaning you have all the paint you're going to need. How do you start? And he just thought it was a stupid question, And I was all earnest, how do you start? He said, well, you make a mark. And from that mark, you then build. And so, I had a problem in the middle of my first novel, The South, as to what to do with these characters. It's the question then, if you brought people towards some sort of completion, but you've another 100 pages to go, you have to unravel that. And I couldn't work out what to do. And I was there, and suddenly, Barry, make a mark, just make a mark. I mean, ink is mark. I mean, who's to say it's not a mark? And so I wrote down, I closed my eyes, I thought, give me a thing. And I wrote the sea, a grey shine on the sea. Just the sea, a grey shine on the sea. And that sea is the first time that I wrote about that coast of County Wexford. I'd never imagined I would write about it. It's where we went on holidays as kids. It's 10 miles from our town, and it's this very desolate part of the coast of Eastern Ireland, which is not rocky or it's not big waves. The waves curl, and you have pebbles rather than rocks. And so it's got no drama. And it was a no drama I could work with. And this has no drama. Don't add drama. Like, don't put rocks into this now. Don't have a big wave came and... No, they don't come like that. So once I could start working with that idea of a gentled landscape, then I could work because I knew it, because that grey sky over the sea. And that came from asking a painter, how do you make a painting?
Yeah.
Make a mark.
This internal voice that you're dramatizing for us, how real is it? And how... is it smarter now than when you were working on The South? Is it the same old challenges, and one response that you've developed is to just put the thing in the drawer and return to it again later on? You're now, 12, 13, who's counting novels in. Do you feel more confident?
There's only one country I have a French translator who's translated all the books. And she's quite sardonic in a French sort of way, and said to me, the number of times I've translated the sentence, at the ball alley, they turned left. Meaning, at that drive down to the sea in County Wexford, there's a thing called a ball alley where you could play ball against a wall, and it is there, you can see it, and if you turn left, you go to the place that I want the novel to be. So no matter what I do, I'm going back to... A woman in Australia said to me, she was buying a book and I was signing, and she seemed terribly nice, and she suddenly turned to me and said, so how many die in this one? I don't know. I said, quite a number, actually. Maybe you should buy someone else's book or something. But the last novel, Long Island, no one dies. It's the only book, first book, no one dies. Why does no one die in this book? And so I thought that was progress.
Yeah.
You know,
We've done Brooklyn, Long Island. Maybe when you write the Bronx, someone will.
Staten Island, maybe.
Staten Island. Yeah. They're not going to let you write a book called Staten Island.
Astoria. Yeah.
You could go to Astoria. Astoria is big now.
Danny, yeah, look at him. Look what happened to him. Yeah.
Ben tells us we've got just a few minutes left, and I'm aware that we're followed by Chiara Hoodies. You're in for a treat, and Chiara gets up here. And something I did want to speak with you about is, Chiara's going to be talking about moving from working on theater into the novel. You sometimes move from the novel into theater. I listened to Lisa Dwan do your Antigone, and I listened to Meryl Streep read Testament of Mary, which you call a novel, but the way that she reads it makes it feel much more dramatic. When you're writing for the stage, dramatic writing, just curious, different ways you think about creating that work versus the novel.
Nicholas Boggs is here, who has written a wonderful new biography of James Baldwin. And one of the lessons from that book, if you need lessons, is don't go near the theatre if you're a novelist. I mean, you watch Baldwin going in with the Amen Corner, you watch him going in with the other play, and just, chaos. And it might be a need for chaos, that the novel itself is such a controlled form. In other words, it's a book. You read it silently, you write it silently. It's sort of, but a play doesn't. There's so many people you have to deal with, and there's the possibility of failure. I mean, I got nominated for the Testament of Mary for a Tony Award. It was great. I was so happy. I got up and washed myself. I thought it was going to be a big day of being congratulated by everybody. So I took a big long shower. The phone rang. It was Scott Rudin on the other end. I thought, this is great. Scott's going to finally congratulate me for something. He's the producer of the show, and he's then closing the show. I say, what? When? And you realize, this is so hurtful. And a publisher cannot close a novel.
Yeah.
And so it's some extraordinary primeval interest in chaos, in finding what is the thing I could most mess up my life with. A series of actors, a producer, a director, telling the actors what you mean, and it won't stop. I mean, it's not just that. I am a girl that can't say no, which means I do too much and I take on too much. But this is always fascinating at the beginning, and even as it goes into its worst, and you learn things. I've been writing libretti. I think that's the plural of librettos, and for opera. And I learned from the first one that I have a character who's come back from the dead, and she's singing in a big mezzo voice on the stage. How did I die? I remember sitting in the audience thinking, this is awful. Like, nobody cares. Someone should shout, no one cares how you get off. And what I learned from that was, for the next opera I did, nobody does anything like that. They're all just all in love, and they all get married at the end, and it's all happiness and comedy. So I'm writing no more tragic operas because they're just unbearable. For me, at least, and certainly the audience must have. People slunk out by me. How do you get by the author when the author is out in the lobby waiting to be congratulated? You get by in a very special way. I know that way. So you learn things and you learn nothing. You learn you're a complete idiot, and you learn you're not just a performing flea, you're an idiotic performing flea. And that's very useful, maybe, and character forming.
Well, thank you, Colm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.